everyone. So, we talk about a lot of different topics on this channel, and I'm going to put on my educator hat for a moment. Because one of the things that I want to talk about is lenses and different systems, okay? So, I'm going to probably be throwing out a lot of stuff. The goal is to talk about the things around that and our interactions, and not necessarily the content of, like, what that situation was or is. If you're detracting off on those things, just kind of notice it, maybe kind of let those thoughts go and come back to, hey, we're talking about, lenses and how, okay? We're looking at something. Notice there's a lens right there, okay? And so I think this is important to bring up. We've had Sam, also known as Beyond Safe Words, also talking about social ecology, right? And looking at how the situation around, a coercive situation can happen, right? And that system around it. And so I want to get people into the heaven and the idea of kind of thinking about this different lenses or different systems that are going on. Because it's helpful, especially like when we do videos about random things and we get people coming on our channel, like making all sorts of like just crazy accusations, and they're like, wait a minute. And I look at these things and the thing that I get out of it is that I'm like, okay, you might not have watched the video, but if you did, they might not have understood what lens or what perspective we were coming from in that moment, because there's multiple ways to look at a situation, okay? And I'll probably ask just for some help with the technical words. Still really out of it, brain's a little fluffy. So, yeah, some of you guys are definitely like already tossing out. Feel free to kind of post some ideas for what different lenses you've used are. So one of the situations I think we dealt with was some YouTubers, okay? There's two people, and some really not great like consent stuff or some weirdness in there was being done to another person, okay? And we can look at that situation from those two people, all right? But we can also look at the situation from our interaction with it. Now, maybe in some situations, people have seen these from, hey, my friend is going through this. Okay, my family member. When we're on the internet, we, in those situations, start being multiple steps out, like decently far out, okay? We are watching this happen on a screen somewhere far away from us versus, in the situation right next to us. So the actions that we take and the responses that we have, we're not necessarily going to be able to influence that situation in a wholly direct manner that we could with, like, hey, my best friend is going through something, that we have a lot of control and influence in. Somebody off on the internet, Twitter, hundreds of thousands of people posting, that's not the same situation. But we can take a lens and look at that situation through the bystanders and the people around it, okay? Or people's YouTube communities. We can look at it from a community's perspective and say, okay, what as somebody in this community can we do, right? Because in that community, you exist as both you yourself, an individual, but also as a community member, part of a group. So notice that there's an individual lens there. There's also a group lens, all right? And so that's at least two, and then I suppose you've got, the whole of YouTube and Twitter, okay? And then there's some overlap. And you guys see how now we've got multiple different perspectives going, right? What do you got in there?
So a couple things on this is that we already had people in chat talking about different lens of analysis. For example, Marxism is a lens of analysis. Critical race theory is a lens of analysis.
Those are in there too, yeah.
Integral theory is a lens of analysis, is a way to look at multiple perspectives or multiple domains of how a thing exists. What is it like to be trans versus what are the systemic effects on trans people? Those are two different quadrants. The purpose of a map is not to be perfect, but it's a way in for which we can kind of sort of understand phenomenon. The biggest thing that people misunderstand is that they don't understand that these maps are by their nature often clinical, cold, academic, and in a lot of times very ways by which we are trying to look at things in a very specific light. Marionette asks, can we parse the difference between a lens and framework? In this regard, I would say there's not a whole huge amount of difference. Although I would say the framework tends to be more the way in which you're sort of supporting the lens.
Yeah, the framework being like an overarching framework, a lens being a particular thing in that framework is what I would say.
Yeah, like I would say, like you have to be in a framework that understands that classes exist and that these classes have different experiences and different cultures before you could use a lens of analysis of like Marxism, right? Because it's inherently built on of sort of this. I might be using this term wrong because I always forget, but axiom of classes are a thing, right? Might be using that term wrong. I always forget what axiom. I always forget the term axiom. It makes my brain hurt. But again, like think about it like this. To be trans, you have to operate from a perspective that gender is different than sex. You are coming from a lens of analysis of queer theory or gender theory. That's the valid use of axiom. Oh, thank you, Tiamat. Again, Tiamat's that part of my brain that reminds me how to do things right. It's good. But that's the thing, is that we have to look at the framework in the system as a way of doing things. And Niana, you're right. This isn't the terrain. Anytime we're talking about any of this, what we're really talking about with lenses, I like that language better.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're really talking about is maps. Whether we're talking about maps of meaning or we're talking about maps like integral, they're all maps. And you can say which ones are useful, which ones are not. There are maps that conservatives use that I think are garbage because there's not really empirical evidence that really falls into them or makes sense. The problem is that in a lot of cases, there's so many different ways to go about this. Not only are we talking about the lens of analysis we're using, the framework, right? The framework of which we're kind of like building that lens or using that lens. I could also say that framing theoretically is slightly different because framing is sort of an angle by which you're coming at the lens through. We talk about this a lot in therapy, the idea of reframing. That is, someone, let's say, has a view about themselves like maybe they think that they're worthless or they're not lovable or they're not really cared for. But by presenting evidence showing the effects of their loved ones and how those people really care for them, by definition, you suddenly go, oh, wait, actually, no, we can reframe these thoughts and go, this actually isn't how this works. We can change the way that these sort of data points line up. That's really what that is it's changing the data points based on this sort of lens of analysis. Yeah, you do, Lil. But that's the thing, like...
Well, and the lens, right, coming from the space of, like, an internal belief, you know? And so working, the other way to look at that is working to change that internal belief will change how you're looking through that lens of the world outside of you. I like lenses as a metaphor. I just, the imagery of the thing that I'm looking at it through just makes my brain really happy, So,
So... And I would add this, and this is going to be the one that no one's going to like, because I'm going to take this into a different angle.
Where are you going with this?
Yourself is a lens.
Oh, okay.
Like, I was like, why would you disagree with this?
No, anyway. I don't disagree with that. I had a plan for this, and this is not the plan that I had.
I will make this quick so I don't divert too much far from Zena's plan. Essentially, what I will just make the argument about is, whenever you are looking at things, this is where we talk about the notion of confirmation bias. This is what it's a way for experiencing phenomenon. That's simply what it is. Your experience by its nature is through a lens by which you view your sense of self. If you hate yourself or love yourself, your experience of reality will differ. Obviously, the objective parts we agree on will at least be roughly same, but as far as their way of feeling or how the world is, no, that can get very projective based on that lens. The way the lens is constructed changes how it allows light or whatever we're using as a metaphor through that lens through. So that's all I'm saying. I can talk about that more in a future video. Back to what you were saying.
Yeah, I think the note on that one is that it's important to recognize that that's kind of the lens when we're seeing like, hey, somebody had a radically different upbringing to me. They're going to have a different lens based on their internal experience. And so internal experience is going to change how you view things. So I think the big thing that I want people to keep in mind here is, one, try and be conscious of how you're looking at something. Say to yourself, this is the perspective I'm looking at. This is how I'm looking at it from. Okay, you can expand out from there. You can, look at it from multiple perspectives or change perspectives, all of that.
So by the way, guys, there's a person typing in chat right now that I'm going to hide Discord chat. Their name is Jamie8470. They are the same person that was in YouTube chat. I need people to ban them immediately. Yeah, I saw them typing. Or I can ban them. Sorry to interrupt, Zena. I got it.
So,
took care of it.
I think the reigning thing is in here is that I wanted to talk about this, that way people can kind of have an idea of what's going on, because I know Jess and I can switch between different perspectives and different ways of looking at things very quickly. You know, and so I wanted to be able to kind of have a tool or to kind of understand when that is happening. Okay. Because I think it can be hard at times to hold multiple different perspectives. I think, you know, we're looking at like, hey, this person's in a crappy like situation where they're not really being respected, or there's, you know, sexual assault or something. And it's easy to get very emotionally drawn into those things. Okay. And if that situation is really, really far removed from us, you know, and we're dealing with, like I saw like in the comments, and we're dealing with, hey, I'm really not in that situation, but I'm around it. Okay, that's a different lens. And I think that there are other people in other communities that don't seem to understand this stuff, okay? That we can still talk about that situation, but we can also talk about the outside roles over here from people who are removed from that. Okay? Yeah, and these are just some example of lenses. You know, literary stuff is going to shift it. Terry Pratchett's idea of first, second, and third thoughts, okay? The things that are just coming up, the things that we're thinking about, the stuff we're thinking, you know. This
well,
is
and
in
also
that boat.
just, again, and this comes at it from not only your sense of self, your own confirmation biases, your own biases as a whole. We could also be talking about this again through theories, right? Like a really good example of this is if you watch Lindsay Ellis's like film theory on Transformer movies.
Yeah, the Transformers one. Those are super good.
How do you view this from a feminist theory? How do you view this from a Marxist theory? How do you view this through an auteur theory?
She's got what, 12 videos?
It's like 8 or 12, something like that.
It's like 8 or 12 videos talking about film theory from the perspective of looking at Transformers.
I ate the whole plate.
I ate the whole plate. Yes, it is the whole plate. Those are super amazing. I highly suggest it. That would really illuminate this conversation. I have gone through those with Jess. It's been a while. I can't believe we forgot those. So yeah, that was basically what I wanted to talk about. You know, just give people a little bit of framework for the understanding that we're going to be using. So that way when you hear us talking like systems, lenses, or from this perspective, you kind of know what we mean and kind of what we're doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, the Michael Bay lenses.
Yeah.
I really like Lindsay Ellis's essays too. I will go back to the Hercules one like no other, and also the live-action Beauty and the Beast one, because it's where the greatest GIF of all time comes from. Thanks, I hate it. So I don't really have anything else to add here. I think that was a really good piece, and I think that does, it allows people to get a meta. You know, we can talk about this from like more complicated terms, but it's the second and third thoughts. It's the cognition to be able to step back in yourself, look at yourself, and look at the thoughts you're having, the framing from which those thoughts are having, what theories are you using, right? And we really, it's something that I think is really important. What Zena's pointing to is just self-awareness of, just be aware of what framework we're using. Yeah. If you don't know, ask. Mm-hmm. And if there's a way in which you are not sure that framework can be, if you're not sure where you're coming from, maybe it's a good thing to stop and reflect on. Adrienne, you asked, do you think a lens can be broken? Yes, though I'm not going to get into that right now.
I will say that broken's not my general choice of language, but we were talking about, like, the self can be biased. Okay? Definitely. Like, there are ways your Gestalt language, okay, you show up to the room with everything. All right, all of your past stuff, all of that stuff there, you show up with that. And no, people can get very skewed perspectives. We see that all the time. And that will definitely influence the lens that they are using. Okay? So.
Yeah, and and again, I don't know how far we can take the metaphor, but a lot of people are already kind of going into next steps of this. Maybe we need to talk about this more at another time. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think that we don't talk about with lens of analyses that we probably could get into, and especially if we take that idea of the lens of self and the way we interact with our reality, I think this actually empowers you a lot into ways how you perceive yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
Metacognition, the ability to look at your thoughts and understand the framework of how those thoughts are coming up or why they are the way they are, is useful. Yeah, no, Niana, absolutely. Your depression colors like a film over the lens. If we're using lenses and film lenses and light as a metaphor, imagine a film over it. You know, it's suddenly this like grayish film that suddenly changes the way things are. That's going to change the way light moves through this. The lens can be cracked. The lens can be fucking broken in some cases. And it can also be, and can it be incepted? I think there is ways that you can bring in, you can sort of bring someone an idea. You can bring in an idea to somebody and sort of modify them, but I don't know how much that's actually a lens change.
We're really mixing like a lot of nouns in here and a lot of extra words in here that is making this a really muddled conversation, okay?
Marionette, either ego death or I would also say a full psychotic break would also fall into that lens.
Like, at a certain point, just the noun for how we're looking at something, like, this is just the word, these are the words describing the experience, okay? And so I don't want to say that the experience is broken or bad or good or anything. It's just describing the phenomenon of how we're going about this, okay?
Yes, Tiamat. Too many cooks burn the metaphor.
Yeah, that super happens. So, like, the lens is just one noun in all of this, okay? And there's things behind that, you know, we might look more like, hey, at the person, what's going on with them? We do this with authors in literary classes, you know? We can look at it from... We can look at a novel from how, you know, society reacts to it, or how a filmmaker, you know, reacted to that book. Whatever. So those are just some different things to... My suggestion for now is probably kind of mull over this, come think through this. You are always welcome to talk about this in video discussion. I will be probably keeping an eye on that for sure. And I think once we kind of feel like we got this kind of groundwork going, we can kind of look more at other, you know, parts of this conversation. Does that sound good?
No, it makes sense. My only addition I'll say to this, and then I'll be done with my part, is there was a question by Ash saying, would distorted thinking be considered lens breaking? No, I don't think that's sufficient. I would actually say that the term distorted actually describes it really well. Have you ever, like, had the wrong lens inside your glasses? Yeah, it's a distortion. It's an issue of you're coming at it from a very, like, incredibly narrow view. Good, if we don't want to use lens because this is getting too mixed, I actually really like the term from Robert Anton Wilson, the idea of reality tunnels. I think that actually has some utility too, but we can talk more about that at a future time.
Yeah, I would say if the lens is here and you've got people going on back here and there's all sorts of stuff going on this way, you know, that is influencing what this is.
The point is,
that's all.
If you don't know what angle we're coming from or what framework or what lens we're coming from, ask. And if you don't know where you're coming from, maybe reflect on it. End of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can also ring the bell if you want to be notified of our videos. If you want to help the channel, you can donate at streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. You also can become a patron at patreon.com/transgirltherapist. For as low as $3, you can support our channel. Thanks for watching.